Today,
Kyle Busch.
When the sun comes up on America, across open fields, small towns, and city streets, a new day begins. And here, we rise with it. This is where hard work meets headlines, where truth matters, and America wakes up informed.
An interesting week.
They all are. This is your country. This is your morning. This is Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. America, let's do it together.
Love you, Ivy.
Love you too.
And it starts right now.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. This is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy on Daybreak on this Friday, May 22nd of 2026. Welcome to it. Glad you're here. Glad I'm here filling in. Three big things you need to know. How about that? Number one, President Trump says the U.S. may have to do something very drastic when it comes to Iran. Well, speaking from the Oval Office yesterday, the president said the U.S. has total control of the Strait of Hormuz. He added the U.S. blockade in the strait has been, well, 100% effective. We keep getting close to a line where hostilities might restart. See if that changes anytime soon. Two, truly shocking news from the world of NASCAR, where legendary driver Kyle Busch has passed away at the age of 41 years old. Earlier on Thursday, the Busch family posted that he had been hospitalized with a severe illness after he was abruptly pulled from the Coca-Cola 600 race at Charlotte Motor Speedway. No word yet on what that illness might have been. And number three, Memorial Day holiday travel expected to be a record breaker despite high gas prices. AAA projects 45 million Americans will travel at least 50 miles from home between today and Monday. The national average price for gas currently $4.56 a gallon. Gas Buddy predicts that could rise to $4.80 a gallon soon over this Memorial Day weekend. That's where we start hour one of Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram filling in this morning. Thanks so much for being alongside for this ride. Pleased and privileged to be here as guest host. Almost a decade of guest hosting for Steve, and glad to be here. If you're new, welcome. I'm here at Hillsdale College, where I serve as the general manager of the award-winning student radio station, WRFH. Our students doing great things. We've got two headed off to the Wall Street Journal who just graduated, one to the Washington Stand, and all over the country doing great things. I'm also a lecturer in our journalism department and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. I host great shows like the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, heard on many fine radio stations over the weekend, as well as in podcast form. Heather McDonald, our guest on this weekend show at the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I host a show for National Review called Political Beats. We talk with people around the world of politics about music. Get our guest's favorite band or musical artist. We're smack dab in the middle of a two-part series on the band XTC. Lots of fun there at Political Beats. More than 160 episodes of that. Again, nearly a decade of doing that as well. And a few other things out there as well. I invite you to follow me on X, where I'm active at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or scottbertram.com, where I corral all my media doings. And I appreciate the warm welcome I receive from Steve Gruber and Daybreak listeners as I fill in. By the way, Monday, Memorial Day, so I'm off and Steve and Ivy are off. But Steve and Ivy back Tuesday right here on Daybreak. This hour of the program, Amy King is with us, a widow of a fallen soldier. Captain Andy King will talk a bit about Memorial Day and her book, Saying It Out Loud, A Young Widow's Triumph Over Tragedy. Wayne Morrow also with us later on this hour, too. A Tale of Two Warnings, a piece that he's written. And we'll see if we talk Stephen Colbert this hour. If we don't this hour, we'll talk next hour. Last night, the last Colbert show. I'm not here to celebrate. I'm not here to mourn. I do have a few things I want to say about exactly why he failed, in the manner he failed, how he's infected the rest of late night, and what the Colbert legacy truly is. And by the way, how all of us on the right were completely gaslit about this guy when he took over the show a decade ago, more than a decade ago. We were told, yeah, he's a moderate guy. He plays the pompous conservative, but he's no liberal whatsoever. Turned out, of course, that was a total lie. We'll come back to that. I start with the unveiling yesterday of the autopsy from the DNC. Why did Democrats do poorly in 2024? And this is one of those topics that I think conservatives, Republicans, have a much better handle on than Democrats. Like, conservatives can tell you why Democrats failed in 2024. Democrats probably still slightly curious. They really can't figure out why people preferred President Trump to Kamala Harris in 2024. And there's this autopsy that the DNC did not want to release. They were going to keep it private. CNN apparently got some sort of leaked copy, or at least information. They were going to run a story about it. And to get in front of it, the DNC released the full autopsy yesterday about this outside investigation about what went wrong. Now, to begin, not all autopsies are correct. This is not like a autopsy on a deceased body where you can be fairly accurate about exactly what caused the manner of death. This is just another analysis of what caused a political party not to win. If you recall the big RNC analysis, I think it was after 2008, maybe 22. No, it was 2012. It was 2012 because people thought, well, slam dunk. Obama's unpopular. Obama's going to lose. Mitt Romney, moderate kind of guy. He'll be fine. And he lost. And people said, well, now what? And there was an autopsy of why Romney lost. And one of the big takeaways was you have to embrace amnesty. Sorry, this issue's over. Illegal immigration's here to stay. The Republicans need to embrace amnesty and go all the way, give people path to citizenship, do all this. And there were those out there who accepted that as truth. Very prominent people out there said yes, on the right, said yes, amnesty. That was wrong, clearly wrong. So this doesn't have to be true. But the DNC autopsy says, if you can believe this, Kamala Harris lost because she was not negative enough against Donald Trump. Yes, calling him a dictator, fascist, Hitler, a guy who was going to bring down democracy. That was not negative enough on Donald Trump. And Kamala Harris and Democrats, the autopsy says, didn't do enough to remind Americans why they didn't like Donald Trump the first time around. And they didn't do a good enough job about defining who Kamala Harris is. I think they did a fine job of defining Kamala Harris, and people rejected who Kamala Harris is. Amber Duke, I think, is at the Daily Wire. I apologize to Amber if I'm wrong about that. Went through this with a fine-tooth comb yesterday and posted what the leaked DNC autopsy doesn't mention. And my guess is there's a whole lot of this that you would use to explain why Democrats lost in 2024, but they couldn't find evidence in this autopsy. Inflation. Inflation is not mentioned as a reason why Democrats lost in 2024. Podcasts, women's sports or bathrooms, pronouns, religion or religious, white men, gas prices. None of those things mentioned. One mention of trans in the context of fighting that highly effective they, them ad Trump campaign ran. Only one border mention. Only one mention of 80-20 issues, but no definition of those 80-20 issues and why Democrats were on the wrong side of 80-20 issues. As autopsies go, this appears to be fairly incomplete. I'm not sure if I want Democrats to take the advice or to ignore it. I have to ponder that a little bit more. Scott Bertram sitting in for Stephen Ivy this morning here on Daybreak. Welcome back. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Steve, Ivy off today. Scott Bertram sitting in. Thanks so much for being here. We'll talk with Amy King in about 15 minutes, widow of a fallen soldier, Captain Andy King. Her book, Saying It Out Loud, A Young Widow's Triumph Over Tragedy, will take you into the Memorial Day weekend with a conversation with Amy King in about 15 minutes or so. If you're sticking with us all morning, and of course you should, you really should, in hour 3 of Daybreak this morning, we talk with Robert Verbruggen, who's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He also has the cover story in the brand new print edition of National Review, which you also, of course, can find online. And his piece is called Why the Fight Against Fraud Must Be Won. And more indictments yesterday. We're going to hear some from the Assistant Attorney General and the FTC chair in a moment. But if you think back to discussions and fights about the deficit and spending over the past X number of years, call it 10 years, certainly, 15 years, probably. And there are candidates who say, how am I going to balance the budget? How am I going to rein in spending? They say, well, I'm going to fight waste. I'm going to fight fraud. I'm going to fight abuse. And generally, the response from the mainstream media, Democrats, I repeat myself, and analysts is that that's impossible. There's no way to find enough waste, fraud, and abuse running through our government coffers to save enough money to come close to balancing a budget, to come close to any sort of real savings when it comes to what governments spend. You heard that over and over again. And I think what we'll talk later about with Robert Verbruggen and what we're all sort of realizing as more of these stories leak out and viral videos about what's happening in Minneapolis and Luke Rosiak's reporting about what's happening in Ohio is that maybe there actually is enough waste and fraud and abuse to be found to create real savings for the American taxpayer. And certainly some credit goes to Doge. Mark Hemingway wrote a great piece at Real Clear Investigations a few months ago about kind of like what happened to Doge. And his thesis generally was, they did some good things. They were over their skis on a few things, but they sort of left a pathway, a blueprint for the rest of us to continue that work and find waste, fraud, and abuse in government spending. And of course, even Doge itself uncovered a lot of things happening at U.S. aid where there was money being spent that should not have been being spent. And now we come to yesterday's announcement about 15 more people being indicted for fraud just in Minneapolis, just in Minnesota, with about $90 million just for those 15 people in fraud. Let's set this up. I'll come back and say a few more things. FTC chair at this press conference yesterday about prosecuting fraud in Minnesota, the message it should send to others all across the country. This is cut number 7.
A is about bringing justice to the fraudsters at an unprecedented pace, and the whole country owes tremendous gratitude to the acting Attorney General, to Assistant Attorney General Colin McDonald, to the U.S. Attorney Rosen, to the Deputy FBI Director Rhea for today's indictments, and also to the healthcare fraud strike force that was sent here in Minnesota. And I just want to reiterate what was said earlier, having met some of the prosecutors today. The work done at the speed at which it was done is unprecedented. And because of Attorney General Blanche and Colin McDonald, this is going to become the new norm for American fraud prosecutions.
That should fill you with a little bit of hope from the task force on fraud. Andrew Ferguson speaking yesterday. He mentioned the Assistant Attorney General Colin McDonald. He spoke yesterday at the press conference as well, and asked about getting cooperation from various states and various law enforcement entities. And apparently, the help from Minnesota wasn't exactly breathtaking in its scope. This is cut number 8, Assistant Attorney General Colin McDonald yesterday.
To make this work happen and to do it really well requires very good partnerships with local law enforcement, with local prosecutors. That's what will really solve this national problem, is people setting aside ego and agenda and deciding, you know what, we're actually going to do the right thing. That's what is going to be required across the country for this to work. Has the cooperation from the Minnesota individuals met that standard? No, it has not. It's fallen significantly short of the standard that we are seeking to set in terms of what a strong state and federal partnership looks like.
Minnesota said nothing was wrong. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said nothing's happening here. There's no fraud to worry about. And of course, all this was uncovered. These actions have to be, and I think in the press conference yesterday, you heard them sort of reiterate this, it has to be swift and it has to be harsh, because for far too long, it has been far too easy for people to bring in quite literally millions of taxpayer dollars while committing fraud. There was no danger, there was no downside, there was no threat of being found or being prosecuted. So these punishments and prosecutions need to be enough to deter others from starting and perhaps convince those currently engaging in that behavior to stop. Yesterday, 15 indictments, $90 million in fraud just in Minnesota, $46 million between two indictments for autism therapy fraud. And again, this is hurting people who need this help the most. That's why liberals and Democrats really should care about this, and they apparently don't. There's video yesterday, one of these suspects who have been getting away with this for years, likely, jumping from a balcony to avoid arrest. The person who ran the Feeding Our Future organization in Minnesota, $250 million in fraud, sentenced yesterday to 500 months behind bars. You do the math, that's a really long time. That's the kind of prosecution, kind of punishment that is necessary to, again, deter those who might be thinking about it and convince those who are engaging in it to stop, because fraud is rampant. More later on in today's program. Scott Bertram in on Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Off today, back on Tuesday after the Memorial Day holiday. Scott Bertram filling in. Thanks so much for joining me and us here today. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. This portion of Daybreak brought to you by The Wellness Company. Are we on the verge of another pandemic? Is the hype real? Should we be worried? Is it another effort simply to terrorize Americans before an election? Who can we trust? That's where the Wellness Company comes in. You see and hear from Wellness Company doctors all the time here with Steve and Ivy. You know their products are the gold standard for keeping you and your family safe and healthy. The Wellness Company gives you the opportunity to make sure you are prepared for whatever happens with their series of prescription medical kits. Kits that contain an assortment of life-saving medications and guidebooks to assist in the proper use of these medications. Additionally, the Wellness Company offers a variety of products from parasite cleanses to methylene blue, weight loss, so much more that can help you stay healthy and live a longer and more satisfying life. Be prepared, not scared. Go to twc.health/Gruber today to order. That's twc.health/Gruber wc.health/Gruber and use the promo code Gruber there to save 10% at the Wellness Company. You might need something for your health if you're climbing Mount Everest. It's a path fraught with danger. Even the Wellness Company might not keep you safe if you're climbing Mount Everest. Had a record number of climbers on Everest in a single day. 270 people climbed it on Wednesday. It's not even that cool anymore. 270 people are doing it in a day, right? The world's tallest peak, 29,000 feet in the air. The most hikers to climb Everest in a single day had been 223, set back in 2019. 274 people climbed to the top on Wednesday this week, but the Nepal Department of Tourism says it's only around 250. Right? It's only 250. Still breaks the record. They're waiting for a few more climbers to perhaps descend and provide evidence of their claim they reached the summit before confirming that new record. You won't find me climbing Mount Everest anytime soon. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy here on Daybreak. Good morning. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Steve and Ivy off today. Scott Bertram filling in. Thanks so much for joining us. Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday after the Memorial Day weekend. And it is the Memorial Day weekend. We welcome into the program Amy King, who's the widow of a fallen soldier, Captain Andy King, Army Reserve Captain Andy King, killed in a training accident in Virginia, November 2023. Amy King has written a book, Saying It Out Loud, A Young Widow's Triumph Over Tragedy. Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for your husband's service, your family's sacrifice, this new book, Saying It Out Loud. As we approach this Memorial Day weekend, tell us a bit about your husband, Captain Andy King, and what perhaps he loved about his service to the country.
So Andy was signed up for the Army Reserves after we attended Virginia Tech. He was in the Corps of Cadets there. And he also had a civilian career in agriculture. He was a crop consultant. And I think he was just a true patriot and loved our country. And he met, a lot of his long-term best friends while he was serving, and just a lot of great memories. And he was happy to do it. And he was just about to get out when the accident had happened and was going to continue his civilian career here. But it provided a lot of really great opportunities for him and taught him a lot of leadership and just really grew him into a really amazing human being.
The book, Saying It Out Loud, is out now. You can find it at Amazon and elsewhere. Triumph Over Tragedy. You're a member of a community that perhaps, oh, not perhaps, but certainly no one wants to be a member of. How did you come to grips with the reality of what had happened and then get to a place where you can share your story through this book?
Yeah, it took a while. I was in shock for a long time. Just him being in the reserves, you never really expect something like this to happen.
Hmm.
And I did have a little girl at the time. She was 16 months old when he passed. So I really had to just keep moving. And I knew I still had more to lose. I needed to figure out how to be a mom and make the best of everything that I could for her. And I knew she was going to grow up with a huge loss as well. I think it took me a while to embrace the term widow. I really shied away from it for a long time, and I didn't want to meet other widows. And this past year, we're about to hit his third death anniversary, and I feel like I've embraced that community more. And it's just full of a really lot of strong women who have been through similar things, and that has helped me a lot.
Amy King with us. Her book is Saying It Out Loud, A Young Widow's Triumph Over Tragedy. Your husband, an Army Reserve captain. And I know people in the reserve, and they'll go away for a weekend and they're training and they'll be back. And I assume that was your expectation as well. When people think about our fallen soldiers, think about them perhaps dying overseas or dying in combat. This is a little bit different from I don't know, an expectation standpoint, and then you get this news. What is it like as you share these stories, perhaps others who have lost reserve officers?
Yeah, I write about this in the book a little bit. I really struggled identifying as a military spouse when it was overnight, there were Army officers at my door, and we had a whole military style funeral. And that was very bizarre for me to go through because it was a weekend thing. It was not
Hmm.
the main part of our life. And but even the active duty widows and people who have experienced loss overseas, they've all really still taken me in and made me feel like I still have a place here, even though it felt so different for me. But it was this weird um combination of him passing in a car accident. It was a Humvee rollover, but then also he was serving. So it was really hard to wrap my head around those first couple of months of suddenly dealing with the military every day.
You and your husband had a young daughter who will only really know her father through memories, your memories and your stories and photographs. How did you begin to build this pathway, this road to having her understand who her father was?
So early on, I would say Dead Eyes in the Sky. She was almost 2 years old, and that was something that she could understand. And we would always tell her, you know, he can see you, but you can't see him. And that has helped her a lot. As she gets older, she'll be 4 in a couple weeks here, and we're able to tell her more stories about her dad that she understands. Like, he grew corn for the cows, and we're able to like tell her more that she can comprehend so that she can know him better. But we have photos of him all over our home and flags. Every time we see a flag at Lowe's or on the highway, she said, "That's Dada's flag." And so we try and make a lot about him. Anytime we can mention him, we do. And she probably says his name every single day. Um, and so it's been just amazing to see her still have a relationship with him as best as she knows how. And that's all she's ever going to know. But we just try and keep him very alive in our home.
Amy King with us, widow of a fallen soldier, Captain Andy King. The book is Saying It Out Loud, A Young Widow's Triumph Over Tragedy. And you've also undertaken efforts to keep his memory alive, not just for your family, but for others. Memorial 5K, a scholarship fund. How are you working to keep Andy's memory alive?
I'm just trying to do as much long term that has some longevity to it for Adeline, my daughter. The Memorial 5K is just a great time to gather with people who you don't really see or talk to all year who did know Andy. As people who grieve would understand, as time goes on, you start to get more disconnected from people. People check in less.
Hmm.
And so those events, they're a great way to raise money for the scholarship, but they also I think bring us all together to really like think about Andy on that day when we do an event like that. And that's all I want, is for Adeline to get to show up to those things one day and see like all these people loved my dad, all these people are here for my dad, and to know that we will always try and honor him. And the scholarship is the same way. It's something that we get to gift to a student annually. It's endowed. It'll go on forever, even, you know, past my life. And so it's just a way to keep his legacy with all the connections he had and all the people he knew in his life. I really want to make sure that that's not wasted.
When people hear and understand your story and stories of widows like you, even as you mentioned, 3 years after his death, people still want to say the right thing or do a thing to help you or to say how much they appreciate your sacrifice. What do you still need, or what do you want to hear? What can people do?
I always say, like, to me, there's never like wrong things to say. I think when anyone says anything, it helps me, just like the acknowledgement. And I always love when people ask me like, what can I donate to in Andy's memory, or like what can I support, what organizations could I support. And so there's a lot of young widows organizations, there's a lot of like military widow organizations, and just support that a lot of widows need, scholarship funds, or things
Mhm.
Andy was interested in. I always love when people want to find a way to do something in his memory.
A.B. King, the book is Saying It Out Loud, A Young Widow's Triumph Over Tragedy. Amy, again, thank you for the book and both your sacrifice, your husband's sacrifice on behalf of our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertrand filling in on this Friday morning, May 22nd, 2026. Great to be with you today. Appreciate you joining us. Also joining us now, Wayne Morrow, who's CEO of the John Birch Society, nonpartisan civics and education organization endorsing the timeless principles of the Declaration of Independence, which you might have heard is celebrating a birthday in about a month and a half or so. JBS.org is the website, JBS.org. Wayne, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for jumping in on this this Friday morning. Writing a bit here, you are about a pair of books. 1984 by George Orwell, which is very well known among Americans. One that I'm less familiar with, certainly, is one called Fabian Freeway, High Road to Socialism in the USA by Rose L. Martin. Tell us a bit about that one.
Yeah, sure. Well, the Fabians is a good story. It's a UK-based socialist Marxist group. Good story about that. It started by Bertrand Russells and people of that ilk back in the 1800s. Even H.G. Wells was a member, and they started the Labour Party. The current Labour Party prime ministers all through the history of the UK have been members of the Fabians. The Fabians believed in a slow walk to socialism and versus hardcore Marxism. And so the current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is a Fabian. The story goes this way. You mentioned 1984. Aldous Huxley was describing to a young author a little bit more about what they did. And he talked about this vision for a new world. And this man decided to write the book about it so well. And he said, I can't use my real name. So he said, I'll use this fictitious name. He came out with George, the first name, and Orwell. So George Orwell's real name is Eric Blair. And he used the term 1984, the name of the book. People ask, why is that? That's because the Fabians initiated their existence in 1884. And they said within 100 years of existence, they have world government. So that's why it's called 1984. And of course, now you hear about Orwellian or Big Brother. That was coined by George Orwell. And so we see today many things going on, especially in the UK, is that the installment of socialist communist control. We're watching the UK being systematically destroyed in all fashions. Interesting, from the existence of the Fabians, President Wilson sent back over in the turn of the century. He sent over some folks from the United States to understand a little bit more about the Fabians, and they came back in the 1920s. They formed the Council on Foreign Relations. So the CFR in New York City and the Fabians in England are really brothers and sisters doing the same thing, the bidding for world government. And that's really the story behind it. It's a great book. We saw it in our bookstore, but The High Road to Socialism by the Fabians. I mentioned this to the UK's on TV, much like this opportunity. And you Google search Fabians, you'll see a series of now Brits talking about the Fabians destroying their country. And you can look in, X or whatever, and you'll see guys walking around, thousands of people walking around Trafalgar Square, waving their British flag, saying, we need freedom. We don't want socialist government. We want our government back again. So it's catching on. So they didn't know much about the Fabians, but certainly do now. Anyway, it's an interesting book, but that's the story behind the Fabians.
Wayne Morrow with us, jbs.org, the website, as we do approach America 250 here. And many people are taking a look back at the Declaration of Independence and looking back at the Constitution. How would you compare our political landscape today to the one that was laid out 250 years ago or so?
Wow, we have too much government. Our government is far, far greater than what it was supposed to be. Article 1, Section A of the Constitution is few and defined. There wasn't an FDA, EPA, ABC. There wasn't all those private education. They never existed. And so what happened, our states, which are sovereign, gave lots of their political power to the federal government. And our founding fathers warned about that. He said, be careful of large governments, because if that goes, they got to control. And that's what they fought against when they left the Great Britain. against a tyranny and I would see this happen regardless who the president is. Government has gotten way too big. Now you watch at what, $39 trillion in debt. So I always warn the legislators of the states, take back your legislative powers away from the federal government. So that's what we have today. So it's a shadow of what our founding fathers drafted up for us. And I encourage people to read it. Unfortunately, not too many people read the U.S. Constitution, and about zero read their state constitution. That's a pretty scary thing, huh?
Yeah, indeed. We hear a lot about um, Congress not using its power these days, right? The power of the purse or whatever power is vested in that branch of government. As you look
Yes.
at these state governments, is that also a problem in these individual states that state legislatures are not using that power that is vested in them?
Yeah, well, I think they kind of lost their thoughts of their responsibilities to their various states.
Hmm.
That's really where I think they are. And you asked men who are in legislator and women, only a few, even a few of the legislators who read their state constitution. This is a scary thing. I mean, I've got that from state senators where I live. They said only 5 or 6. Really? I mean, how about, how can you be a mechanic in a car and not read the rule book about how do you repair things? I mean, come on now. But I have to blame our ordinary citizens. Our problem, the Birch Society, is we're teaching Americans about their own country, and it's
Hmm.
sad, but we're never taught American civics any longer, and we're just reteaching and relearning not only Americanism to citizens, but also our state legislators, reminding them to read the Constitution, abide by. That's our guidebook, and I think we've gone so far out of whack on purpose because we led down the road, as we mentioned the Fabians, we started this conversation, is that they want to go to the high road of socialism, which is controlled by government, which is not us at all. We're a republic ruled by
Yeah.
law. Right?
Wayne Morrow with us, jbs.org for the John Birch Society. Wayne, thanks so much for joining us this morning here on Daybreak.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
In 2025,
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. I'm not Steve and Ivy, although they will be back Tuesday after the Memorial Day weekend. I'm Scott Bertram, fill-in host. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or scottbertram.com. Stick around, too. Hour 2 brings us Solomon Schmidt, who's written a biography of J.K. Rowling, and also my friend Dr. Matthew Mehan from Hillsdale in D.C. Just a beautiful new book for kids of all ages and adults of all ages, too, called The American Book of Fables. We'll talk about that with him. I've got a few Stephen Colbert thoughts to share, too, as his run on CBS comes to an end. If you're looking for a summer activity, I've got good news for you. Registration is now open for the 2026 Florida Python Challenge, where avid and amateur hunters alike can compete for cash prizes as they find and kill Burmese pythons. It's a problem in Florida, you know. The grand prize here on the python hunt is $10,000, but $15,000 is also available across different categories. So clear your calendars now. A multi-day event in July from the 10th through the 19th. There are 8 locations. You just can't go willy-nilly across the state of Florida to find your pythons. 8 different locations to hunt for the pythons. It costs $25 per person to sign up. You've got to complete an online training course and pass a quiz before you can be a python hunter. And there are rules. As I mentioned, there are rules. Use of firearms, prohibited. Use of dogs, prohibited. Or any other animals to aid you in your hunt, prohibited. If you kill a native snake, you're disqualified. If you damage or destroy or remove eggs of a native species, you're disqualified. If you're a professional hunter, you may transport a live python, but novices must humanely kill the python at the site of capture. So pythons are an invasive species in Florida. They're eating other animals, of course. Since 2000, more than 23,000 pythons have been removed from natural areas, and that continues with this summer's Florida Python Challenge. Look it up, sign up for your chance to win big bucks. Hour 2 next of Daybreak. Scott Bertram in for Steve and Ivy.
America's awake, and we're just getting started. The headlines that matter, the stories they won't tell you, and the voices fighting to be heard. This is your country, your morning, your daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. A new hour starts right now on Real America's Voice.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan, this is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy here on Daybreak on this Friday, May 22nd, 2026. Welcome to the beginning of your Memorial Day weekend, and thanks for joining us. Here are three big things you need to know. Number one, the former executive director of the Minneapolis nonprofit Feeding Our Future is being hit with a 40-year prison sentence, 500 months to be exact. Amy Bach was sentenced after the organization was found to be conducting widespread fraud in 2022. The FBI alleging virtually none of the millions of dollars in government funds were used to feed poor children, which of course was the ostensible goal of that program. Two, a Tennessee execution was halted yesterday after prison officials were unable to find a vein for a lethal injection. The attorney for Tony Carruthers says officers searched for an hour to find the right vein before Governor Bill Lee granted a temporary reprieve. Carruthers convicted in the 1994 kidnappings and murders of 3 people. Several groups have asked for the case to be reopened based on the potential of new DNA technology. And number 3, a runway at New York's LaGuardia Airport may stay shut down until sometime later today after a sinkhole led to its closure. Port Authority officials there say the sinkhole caused hundreds of delays, canceled flights as well on Thursday. Construction crews, of course, brought in immediately to work on that sinkhole, patch things up, and have the runway ready to go. At some point today, I've flown in and out of LGA a number of times, and boy, you don't want runways to be shut down if at all possible. That's where we start hour number 2 of the Steve Gruber Show and Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve here at Hillsdale College, where I serve as the general manager of the student radio station, the award-winning WRFH, also a lecturer in journalism, teaching our students here at Hillsdale, and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. I host a number of our shows, too, like the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, heard on many fine radio stations on the weekend, also available in podcast form. You can also find me hosting a show called Political Beats, where we talk about music with people in politics. It's a little off-ramp from the political discussion into having some fun with people in the world of politics. 160 episodes or so. Your favorite band or artist might be covered. Check it out at nationalreview.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We've got a Patreon page, too, if you really love it and want to support us and get extra bonus episodes and such. Find me on X at Scott Bertram or scottbertram.com. Always a little caveat as I guest host. When I guest host, I'm not speaking on behalf of the college. I'm only speaking on behalf of myself. That should be obvious, but now I make it perfectly clear. Coming up this hour, Solomon Schmidt with us, who's written a biography on J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books. Dr. Matthew Mehan, also later on this hour, a friend from Hillsdale in D.C. He's got just a beautiful new book called The American Book of Fables, and we'll talk with him about that later on this hour. Also later this hour, I want to spend a little more time talking about the end of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Not any sort of, it's not a sad day, put it that way. If you missed it last night, and you probably missed it last night, here is just a small portion of the opening monologue of Stephen Colbert and The Late Show. And this small clip does a lot to explain exactly why Colbert is leaving the air. And I'll talk more about this later on in the hour. But hear this. This is the opening of last night's last Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Cut number 10.
Now, on night 1 of the Colbert Report, back in the day, I said, anyone can read the news to you. I promise to feel the news at you. And I realized pretty soon in this job that our job over here was different. We were here to feel the news with you. And I don't know about you, but I sure have felt it. And I just want to let all y'all know in here and out there how important you've been to what we have done. the energy that you've given us. We sincerely need that to have done the best possible show we could have for you for the last 11 years. You've given it to us, we've given it all right back to you. What would you call that, Lewis?
I would call that a reciprocal emotional relationship.
That's exactly right. Because we love doing this show for you, but what we really, really love is doing this show with you.
All right. That's Stephen Colbert, the last late show last night. It's done. Not just Colbert, but the show itself. He killed it. He helped to kill it. And I'll say more about this later in the hour. But that cut right there when he says, my job is to feel the news with you. This is the reason why the show failed and ultimately was canceled. Stephen Miller, the political pundit, not the White House official, at Red Steez on X, a very good follow, has called The Late Show with Stephen Colbert late night therapy for libs, meaning the place where the far left gathers to feel better about themselves and to have their host tell them that they're always right and everything's okay and they're the good people in all their relationships in life. And then Colbert goes on and says, I feel the news with you. We have a reciprocal emotional relationship. The left is upset because the left is losing a free nightly therapy session with Stephen Colbert, and they're not quite sure where to turn yet. Now, someone will replace that part of their lives. It might be Colbert himself, perhaps on CNN or elsewhere. But that's not what a late night comedy show is supposed to be. And I'll have a few more thoughts about that later on in the hour. Stick around. I wanted to say briefly, or mention briefly, Kyle Smith, writing at the Wall Street Journal this week at the Free Expression newsletter, which is a really good newsletter. You can subscribe or find it at the Wall Street Journal website. A lot of great voices over there on a daily basis in the morning. He wrote a bit this week. I never tire of poking fun at Al Gore and Al Gore's apocalyptic climate predictions that actually never really come true. Kyle Smith went back and collected a few of these Al Gore predictions in his movie An Inconvenient Truth. Predicted within 15 years, Glacier National Park would become the park formerly known as Glacier. No, glaciers are still there. Within the decade, Al Gore said, there will be no more snows on Kilimanjaro. No, the snow is still there. He said hurricanes would be bigger, more powerful. Data show that hurricanes don't exhibit a trend toward increased frequency or severity over the past half century. He claimed there's a 75% chance that the entire North Polar ice cap during the summer months would be completely ice-free by 2016. That, of course, has not happened. You'll notice that these climate alarmists are fading a bit. And certainly, I think Democrats as a party are putting climate toward the back burner, although they'd hate to put it on the back burner because that means there's some, natural gas being used to keep it on the back burner. And then part of it is there have been so many predictions on the record, in film, in print, in books, that people very easily can point to and say, you were wrong about that. Why should we trust you now? And poll after poll shows it's not an issue that moves people to vote. That's being pushed to the side. And of course, now we see more rhetoric from Mayor Mamdani, AOC, the new direction of the Democrat Party. More next on Daybreak.
There are three
Welcome back. Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for both of them this morning on the old program. They're back Tuesday after the Memorial Day holiday. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram. Our guest is Solomon Schmidt. He's the author of A Pen to Change the World, the life of J.K. Rowling, of course, the author of the Harry Potter series of books. Solomon, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here, and blessed Memorial Day to you all this weekend.
Thank you, and to you as well. My daughter just finished the Harry Potter books, and she's very excited to have the chance to talk to someone who's written about the author of those books. The author of those books this morning, J.K. Rowling. Why was it of interest to you to shine a spotlight and to give us a deeper background on the creator of one of the most popular book series in the world?
Yeah, because it had never been done before. If you can believe this, Scott, this is the first complete biography of J.K. It's going to have 150 full-color pictures, many never before published. It's going to be a comprehensive overview of all the legends that are true about J.K., the rags to riches rise of a single mother on welfare, battling domestic abuse and poverty and depression while writing what would become, as you just said, the best-selling book series of all time, and filling this series with profound truths about human life, about battling tyrants, about loss and death and love and friendship and courage and loyalty. And of course, the other fascinating aspect of this to me was I did a biography on Alan Dershowitz called Legal Gladiator, and very similar to Alan Dershowitz, J.K. Rowling is someone who was an icon of the left. I like to call her the mother goddess of the left. I mean, this is someone who was absolutely adored by the left side of the aisle, who was whining and dining with Barack Obama and initially supporting transgender rights in 2016. And this woman, a billionaire who has everything to lose, who used to attack President Trump vociferously, for example, her death is now called for in the same breath as President Trump. There have been many attempts to erase her name in bookstores in the United States, in communities here, and in the UK. There are crowds that chant for her destruction in the UK. And this book, the biography of J.K., A Pen to Change the World, has faced cancellation as well. I have had independent bookstore organizations who I've offered to do paid advertising with say, oh, no, this subject matter is not fit for our clientele. The largest Harry Potter fan sites won't take, again, paid advertising for this book. They have erased her name. They don't even cover her. They act like she doesn't even exist.
And actors who she helped make literal millions of dollars now, disown her, which is a nice way to say thank you.
That's right.
Again, you don't have to speak to the politics of this necessarily, but I think about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just recently saying, "No one can earn $1 billion. You can't earn $1 billion." Is the point. And you look at the story of J.K. Rowling, and she did it with just an idea and these characters and a plot that people loved and wanted to buy and turn into movies. And yes, she earned $1 billion just with the thoughts in her head and the pen in her hand.
Yes. The amazing thing about J.K., she was this very, and still is in some ways, with all due respect to her work, sort of from a physical standpoint or from an athletic standpoint or from a charisma standpoint, a plain, ordinary, quirky person by her own description, by the description of people who knew her. But the amazing thing about her is that while she was this single mother living on welfare in a dumpy apartment in Scotland, unimpressive, totally insignificant by the world's standpoints, she was the best in the world at what she did and needed a chance to showcase it. And she got her big break, and then she's been on the front cover of all the newspapers ever since. She's still making the news, even with this book. I've been able to have articles recently published in the New York Post and other national outlets that are covering it. That's just the power of J.K., her creativity, whether people hate her guts or hate her books, her creativity, her storytelling capabilities is unlike anything we've ever seen. And this book will give you the inside story on how she created the Harry Potter saga over 17 years through much turmoil in her personal life, including a very tortured relationship, sadly, with her father and with her abusive ex-husband, who I met and interviewed in Porto, Portugal. It was very difficult to track him down. And all of that also ties into why she was willing to tank her legacy among the communities that had once adored her, and now receive death threats to her, to her children. How this lady who was the star of the left became now, amazingly, an icon of the right.
Yeah. A Pen to Change the World, the Life of J.K. Rowling is the book. Solomon Schmidt, the author, he joins us here on Daybreak. What is it that compelled her to speak up? She could have said nothing. She could have collected her royalties. She could have just been that author who wrote those great books and is out there somewhere and no one hears from her anymore. But she decided to be a voice on the issues of sex and gender that are roiling the world over. What compelled her to do so?
Yeah, there's a few reasons, and one of them, as I mentioned, is very sad, which is her decision to speak out from her own testimony is deeply rooted in her tortured relationship with her father. She described the
Hmm.
childhood home she grew up in as a deeply misogynistic home. This book will go into that entire backstory. I spoke with relatives who have never shared the substantial memories or spoken out at length like they did for this book. It's also rooted in the abuse she suffered at the hands of a man, her first husband, the one I was mentioning earlier that I met in Portugal. When she wrote an essay explaining her reasons for speaking out, she spoke as someone, in her view, who has dealt with misogyny firsthand, sexual assault, very sadly, abuse, physical abuse, and also she cares about free speech. I mean, that's what she
Hmm.
said in her essay explaining her reasoning. She doesn't want to see anyone canceled, even President Trump, who she has personal distaste for and has voraciously attacked over the years. She cares deeply
Yeah.
about making sure that all voices, as crazy as some people might think them, have a chance to be heard and that women and girls are
You
protected. So
Yep, you can read all about it in the new book, A Pen to Change the World, the Life of J.K. Rowling. Solomon Schmidt is the author. Thanks so much for joining us. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Thanks so much for joining us here on the program. This portion brought to you by Purance. If you're tired of thin, lifeless hair, if you cringe every time you see another clump in the shower drain, and your hair probably needs a little more protein. Just like our muscles lose protein as we age and atrophy, our hair loses protein as well, leading to thin, dry, brittle strands. That's where Hydrolift Volumizing Shampoo by Purance can help. Hydrolift contains wheat protein that strengthens your hair follicles from deep within. This transforms thin and lifeless hair into fuller, more resilient locks. It also contains betaine from sugar beets, which draws water into your strands, making your hair feel silky soft. Right now, you can try Hydrolift Volumizing Shampoo risk-free and save 35% with the discount code SUNRISE. Head over to Purance.com to shop and save. Purance also has many other wonderful products if you're looking to rejuvenate your skin, hair, or nail appearance. USDA certified organic, great for your body and the environment. You can save 35% on your entire order with the discount code DAYBREAK So the discount code DAYBREAK. Go to Purance.com to shop and save today with a discount code DAYBREAK. That's Purance.com. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Talk a bit about a little more about Colbert in a second. Also, Dr. Matt Mehan coming up in the back half of this hour as well. I've seen a bit more of this happening, and boy, with AI becoming more prevalent, I'm not sure how far this can go. A Florida Lyft driver accused of using an AI-generated image to claim damages from people who used the car. Two girls charged a $75 damage fee for spilled fries and spilled drinks in the back seat. Hey, I got a photo. It shows the mess. Dad called Lyft after noticing a logo for Google Gemini in the corner of the image. Figured it was AI generated. Lyft reimbursed the family, said the driver would be penalized. But those AI imagery, get people in trouble. Scott Bertram in here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy today. They're back Tuesday after the Memorial Day weekend. Find me on X at Scott Bertram or scottbertram.com. The show's out there too, stevegruber.com and at Steve Gruber Show on your various social media sites. Dr. Matt Mehan coming up in about 10 minutes or so. We'll talk about his new book, The American Book of Fables. I promised, or maybe threatened, a few more thoughts about Stephen Colbert and the end of The Late Show. People are mourning, mainly on the left, of course, other late night hosts saying how terrible it is. Yes, because now their jobs are also in jeopardy. But they really only have to blame Stephen Colbert himself. Some of these writings and thoughts about him and the show. There's a piece in Variety that I'll read briefly from. Stephen Colbert in 2016 tried to bring together a nation that was falling apart. On election night, Colbert and crew mounted a live special for the Showtime cable network. Guests saying, quote, "It feels like an asteroid has smacked into our democracy. Get your abortions now." Another guest said, outside of the Civil War and World War II, and including 9/11, this may be the most cataclysmic event our country has ever seen. Colbert was on later on in that program asking the question, how did our politics get so poisonous? Apparently not listening to his guests earlier on in the program. If we go back to the beginning of Colbert on The Late Show, conservatives were, concern's not the right word, but conservatives, and I remember hearing Rush Limbaugh say this. I remember saying this as I was hosting a show back then when Stephen Colbert took over. This is CBS entrusting The Late Show to a hardline liberal, hardline leftist. And we were all gaslit about that. People came out and said, no, you don't understand Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert is just playing a character. He's just playing this big blowhard Bill O'Reilly type character on the Colbert Report. And Colbert, the person, the real Colbert, is this very moderate, kind of non-political, centrist kind of person. That's what he's going to bring to the Late Show. Don't you worry your head about it. This is just going to be a very non-political, moderate, centrist kind of host. You guys are crazy. All your conspiracy theories about Colbert being a leftist, you're lunatics. And of course, we were all right, because that's exactly who Stephen Colbert turned out to be. And it's odd over the years. What happened is Stephen Colbert went from doing a parody of a hyper-conservative opinion show host on the Colbert Report. And people loved it. High acclaim. Loved it. And then on The Late Show, he unintentionally began doing a parody of a hyper-left opinion show. If you were going to design a parody of a hyper-left opinion show host, you'd design Stephen Colbert, making terrible, awful jokes, embracing, the vaccine and having the dancing syringes, and having the most low notoriety cabinet members of the Biden administration on to talk about things that no one really cares about. He's doing this parody of a hyper-left opinion show host, and he wasn't in on the joke. He didn't understand that that's actually what his show had become. And that was really embarrassing, because once upon a time, Colbert actually had a few funny bones in his body, but they left a long time ago. I want you to hear a few people talking about the end of Colbert, and I'll make another point. Brian Stelter on CNN, and then David Letterman. Actually, let's hear Letterman first. David Letterman, the initial host of The Late Show, who handed it off to Stephen Colbert, was on NBC yesterday talking about the end of Stephen Colbert on The Late Show. Here's David Letterman, cut 5.
What does the end of that show say about comedy in America?
It kind of makes me sad. We always relied on it. You would read the newspaper in the morning, and at night you would see Johnny Carson. And Johnny would give you a perspective, whether you agreed with it or not, but it was always funny. And without that, I think we're losing a valuable perspective. I think it's very, very important to the American culture. I think it's too bad that Stephen is gone. I think it's a huge mistake.
Comparing Carson to Colbert is patently ridiculous. Carson, of course, did politics, but he didn't do it from a hardcore leftist political point of view, an equal opportunity joke maker, which is the exact opposite of Stephen Colbert. It's an odd comparison. And Letterman worshipped Carson. He should know this more than anyone. Brian Stelter, CNN yesterday. Some of this is just absolutely hilarious. Cut 9 here first. Brian Stelter talking about Stephen Colbert Late Show on CNN. Cut 9.
You know, he became a voice of the Trump resistance, first during Trump's first term, now again in Trump 2.0. Politics became an inescapable part of the show, but The Late Show was about so much more than politics. And I think the viewers who are mourning the end of the show today, they're going to miss Colbert the human. You know, he was ministerial in nature, a comforting presence at the end of the night. And yes, he was an outspoken Trump critic, but he was so much more than that.
Comforting presence late at night. The voice of the resistance. Politics were inescapable. Boy, does that sound like a real fun late night show or what? Of course it doesn't. Chicago Tribune had a story yesterday, and an expert from Northwestern University said the legacy of this show needs to be that we remember it as the show that was canceled because a presidential administration wanted it off the air. That's absolutely silly. Owners came in, looked at it losing tens of millions of dollars, and said, why do we keep doing this when the audience is leaving us quickly? And doing a show for hardcore political leftists. The real legacy of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert is that he put hardcore partisan politics ahead of humor and comedy. That then infected an entire genre of late night with that virus. And eventually his show became the first to be euthanized, humanely, by CBS. We didn't need it anymore. What you do need on Monday morning is a new Forgotten America with Ann Funder. Here's a preview of that. I'll tell you a bit more about it in a second.
My son, when he went to public school for the first time, was in high school, second semester, freshman year. He found a new crowd that he just kind of wanted to be friends with. And I think it just, you know, peer pressure would have it that that he tried something when everybody else was, and it took his life. And it was pure fentanyl and blue press powder. It was a counterfeit pill. It wasn't real. And, you know, he was told it was Percocet. So that was deception. It's absolutely deception when they tell you, it's like you ordering something at a bar and them giving you, you know, colored liquid and cyanide. There's no difference. It's complete poisoning. My son's case was treated as a murder investigation because that's what it is when you deceive someone like that. Had my son taken a Percocet, he'd still be alive. So, but this was the story. It's not going to happen to me. And it did. And I assure you it could happen to you as well.
Coming Monday, Forgotten America with Steve and Ivy Gruber. It's Ann Fundner. A conversation bold, eye-opening, and incredibly timely. 9 a.m. Monday on the Steve Gruber YouTube channel. Subscribe now. Don't miss it. Forgotten America. New episode Monday with Steve and Ivy. Dr. Matt Mehan next. Scott Bertram in here on Daybreak. Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertrand filling in today. Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday of next week after the Memorial Day holiday. Really pleased to be joined by my friend Dr. Matthew Mehan from Hillsdale in D.C., also author of the new book, The American Book of Fables. It's just a wonderful book we'll have an opportunity to talk a bit about here. Dr. Mehan, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
You've written a couple of children's books previous to this, and this is also a children's book, but it's for young kids and medium-sized kids and big kids and even adults as well. What made you want to create this kind of book, expansive and distinctly American in its scope?
I wanted an heirloom celebratory book for the American semi-quincentennial, our 250th birthday. So I wanted something that the whole family could share because, frankly, the United States is in need of some more hopeful patriotism, and I think that's best shared through the family.
Give people an idea of what's inside. I've seen it. It's a brilliant book. It's illustrated wonderfully. We'll talk about the illustrations here in a moment. But what's inside the American Book of Fables?
So as you mentioned, there's sections for littles, middles, and bigs. And in the little section, you have nursery rhymes. The middle section, you have fables. You have, in the big section, primary sources, dialogues, short stories, and a journey of Hugh the manatee from the Everglades all throughout the lower 48. But each chapter, all 13 to the 13 colonies, go to a different region of the country and explain that region through those nursery rhymes, fables, and stories and primary sources, and the founding and settlement of the country. And each chapter is keyed to a part of the Declaration of Independence. So you get to learn about the principles, the people, and the history, and the ecology, and the animals and wildlife of the country all at once.
And you, Dr. Bat Mehan, author of the American Book of Fables, had the opportunity to travel all across the country in researching the American Book of Fables. You were out west, you were down south, you were in the Everglades, you were all over the place. What specifically from your travels perhaps inspired certain parts of the American Book of Fables?
One special thing I learned about is Glacier National Park. I knew it existed. I knew it was pretty. I'd seen some pictures, but I'd never gone there and been blown away by its incredible beauty. It's called the backbone of the world, and it's just the most magnificent place. And I learned a ton about its ecology and its nature and its history, and that became the sort of the final chapter, the kind of grand finale. Just that incredible beauty of the glaciers and the glacier melt when all the waterfalls wake up and just start falling down into the valleys like these beautiful curtains all over the place. And then the other thing I learned is one of the fables, I mean, many things, but one thing, when I went to the Everglades, I didn't know we had in America saltwater crocodiles. They're bigger, scarier, and pale, ghostly white. And one actually chased me in the Everglades in the dark of a marina when I was looking for them.
And you survived, which is good news for all of us. Matt, what makes something...
The mosquitoes got me, though.
What makes something, in your mind, truly an American fable and worthy of inclusion in your book?
I think that, well, one, it has to feature our lands, our people, our history, but it also has to feature our principles of equality, of liberty, justice, rule of law, hard work. And then I think a special quality that the Americans have is what I refer to as American wit. We're a very witty people. Like we invented stand-up comedy. I mean, we are actually a very funny and clever people. We're inventive. And we invented flight, the microchip, all these things, jazz. But that sort of shift for yourself, that ability to tell a hawk from a handsaw and use every part of the buffalo and know there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? Dad puns, that whole world, that's actually a really funny and important part of what makes America, America. And it's also a really important part of self-government. So I wanted the book to really foster that wit, and then I wanted it to be married to wisdom. And I mean that in the capital W way, right? Love of God, love of neighbor, and a kind of candid fidelity to your word is your bond. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say, and you do what you say. And that candor and faithfulness. We even named a geyser in Yellowstone, which has a conversation with some ravens in one of the fables. Old Faithful, right? Because we think it's important to be faithful to one another. So wit and wisdom, I think, is a really American character.
Dr. Matt Mehan with us, author of the new book, The American Book of Fables, available now, Amazon.com and elsewhere. You've written a pair of a children's book previously, including The Handsome Little Signet. John Foley has been your illustrator for those books, and he continues here in The American Book of Fables. We're going to pop up a couple of these illustrations for our viewers this morning. But tell us about your work with John Foley, and how does his brilliant illustrations help shape this final book?
Yeah, John he's better with every book we do. He's an old friend. We've been working together for a long time now. He is a realist impressionist painter trained in the Boston School through the École des Beaux-Arts. He can trace his master apprentice line all the way back to Raphael's workshop in Florence. Yes, that Raphael. He's excellent. And he made 13 gorgeous 3-foot by 5-foot oil paintings, about 40 watercolors, and hundreds of pen and ink art illustrations for the book. And we wanted the book to be classic. We wanted it to last for another 250 years, to be a kind of heirloom. It's 395 pages. It's 2 pounds. It's hardback. It's glorious. It is fitting for our 250. And we wanted to sort of go big or go home. And John's beautiful artwork illustrating, and he came with us here. He came with me. He painted in places. I did photography for him, so he had all the stock photos. And it's a beautiful testament to the beauty of the country that he now has illustrated.
This is a book for now. It's a book for July 4th. It's a book for next year. And it's a book your children and you as an adult can learn more each time you read. The American Book of Fables, available now, Amazon.com and elsewhere. Dr. Matthew Mehan is the author. Matt, thanks so much for joining us this morning here on Daybreak.
Thank you, Scott.
Appreciate it. The American Book of Fables, available now. More next here on Daybreak. Friday morning daybreak. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy Gruber this morning. Brock's still here. He's got a look at sports.
With a look at sports, I'm Brock Palmbush. Two-time NASCAR Cup Series champion Kyle Busch died unexpectedly yesterday after a sudden illness at a Charlotte, North Carolina hospital. Busch was the Cup Series champion in 2015 and 2019. He won 63 Cup Series races during his 20-year career. Kyle Busch was just 41 years old. In the NBA playoffs, the New York Knicks took a 2-0 series lead in the Eastern Conference Finals with a 109-93 victory over the Cleveland Cavaliers at Madison Square Garden last night. Josh Hart led the Knicks with 26 points. In the NHL playoffs, the Montreal Canadiens took Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals with a 6-2 whipping of the Carolina Hurricanes on the road. Juraj Slavkovsky scored a pair of goals for the Habs. In Major League Baseball, there was just 7 games. American League winners were Toronto, Cleveland, and the Athletics. National League winners were Atlanta, the New York Mets, Pittsburgh, and Arizona. That's a look at sports. Back to you, Scott.
Appreciate it. This portion of Daybreak is brought to you by Patriot Mobile. Every day, Americans make choices that shape our country.
In 2025.
Right down to which cell phone provider we. Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless provider. They're an activist organization funded by selling top-tier cell phone service. They've been on the front lines defending our freedoms long before it was cool, standing in the gap when others would not. The best part is they deliver prioritized premium service on all 3 major U.S. networks, giving you the same or even better coverage backed by 100% U.S.-based customer support. Get unlimited data plans, mobile hotspots, international roaming, and more. When you switch to Patriot Mobile, you'll help grow a movement that fuels the Christian conservative cause. Every bill you pay helps advance the values of faith, family, and freedom. Switching is easier than ever. Activate in minutes. Keep your number, keep your phone, or have the opportunity to upgrade. Take a stand today. Go to patriotmobile.com/Gruber or call 972-PATRIOT. Use the promo code Gruber for a free month of service. That's patriotmobile.com/Gruber or call 972-PATRIOT. Make that switch today. Coming up, Hour 3. Come with us to Hour 3. Steve Dulan with us, regular guest, and Robert Verbruggen from the Manhattan Institute on fighting fraud across the United States. Scott Bertram in here on Daybreak.
America's awake, and we're just getting started. The headlines that matter, the stories they won't tell you, and the voices fighting to be heard. This is your country, your morning, your daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. A new hour starts right now.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan, this is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy on Daybreak on this Friday, May 22nd, 2026. Thanks so much for joining us. Here are three big things. The Justice Department announcing more than a dozen new indictments in its fraud crackdown in Minnesota. Assistant Attorney General Colin McDonald made the announcement yesterday. He said the fraud cost taxpayers $90 million. Just the indictments yesterday. McDonald said it's only the beginning of the DOJ's work in the state. 2. Meta is settling a lawsuit over allegations its platforms contributed to a mental health crisis. The suit, brought by a school district in eastern Kentucky, sought to force Meta to cover the costs the district has incurred to fight the crisis. District accusing Meta of designing its platforms to get young users hooked, then causing widespread anxiety and depression. And number 3, the auto racing world, NASCAR world, stunned by the death of 41-year-old legend Kyle Busch. Busch passed away Thursday of a sudden and undisclosed illness, tributes pouring in from all over. Denny Hamlin called Busch one of NASCAR's fiercest drivers, Jimmy Johnson calling him one of NASCAR's greatest talents, and saying, "We have all lost a friend," Kyle Busch, passing away at the age of 41 years old. That's where we start hour 3 of the Steve Gruber Show in Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday after this Memorial Day weekend. I'm with you for one more hour here. We'll talk with Steve Dulan this hour. Also, Robert Verbruggen from the Manhattan Institute, a cover story at National Review, Why the Fight Against Fraud Must Be Won. That will be an interesting conversation. Start the hour by discussing an earthquake in Michigan politics yesterday, the unexpected withdrawal of Mike Duggan from the governor's race. Former Detroit mayor, running as an independent, a few months ago leading the polls, to dropping out of the race yesterday. Broke just after yesterday morning's show. I think Nolan Finley at the Detroit News had the story first, and then, of course, trickled out everywhere. Craig Mauger's story at the Detroit News yesterday, just reading a bit here. Mike Duggan's independent campaign to be Michigan's next governor ran aground Thursday, observers said, because of an intensifying focus on national politics and the former mayor's inability to tap into voters' changing frustrations. Duggan writing yesterday, "If we were even in the polls and behind in fundraising, we have a path to winning. If we were behind in the polls and even in fundraising, we have a path. But we're behind in both." And so he has dropped out. And this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, I must admit. A source close to Duggan telling the Detroit News that Donald Trump had shown no signs of relenting on the war in Iran. The 2026 election had become essentially a nationalized one here in Michigan. In that environment, there was no path for an independent who was attempting to take on the two-party system that defines the national political scene. Duggan wanted to talk about topics like education on the campaign trail. All he's been hearing about lately has been Iran and gas prices, so says the source to the Detroit News. I find it difficult to swallow that. Mike Duggan's a political professional. Mike Duggan's been mayor of Detroit. Mike Duggan's been around the world of politics for a long, long time. And he understood what the hurdles would be if he ran as an independent and not a Democrat. Thought that would be the easiest path or an easier path to victory. I can't fathom he and his advisors not believing the national economy would be perhaps the biggest issue of this election or any election. The economy always is front and centered. State elections become nationalized in this environment. It's happened over and over again. It is hard for me to believe that that was not an anticipated hurdle. not an anticipated problem he might run into when he announced himself in this race. In February, a couple of months ago, he was leading the race within the margin of error, leading the race at 30%. John James, 29, Jocelyn Benson, 28%. The most recent poll had it shaken up a bit. Benson, 34, John James, 29, Duggan, 23. A bit of a shakeup, but again, when you include the margin of error, not that different and not that insurmountable before the general election come November. And yet, Mike Duggan says he's done. He's out of this race. And I was scratching my head yesterday. I admit, I posted over on X too. I'm not saying that there's some untoward story being buried that they don't want to come out. I am saying that the stated rationale doesn't make sense to me. That a seasoned political professional like Mike Duggan couldn't anticipate that this election would be nationalized, or Donald Trump wouldn't be a key factor on the ballot, or that the economy, the national economy and gas prices, energy prices, wouldn't be front and center in a race. Didn't make sense to me. So I'm thinking about this all day, and last night I see this post from Mark Nida over at the Michigan Enjoyer. And I said, aha, okay, maybe this. And I asked Mark to actually join us this morning. He's on dad duty this morning, watching the kids, so I totally understand. But you can find his writing over at the Michigan Enjoyer. Duggan dropped out because he oversaw Detroit's poisoning. And the Michigan Enjoyer has been reporting on this, and you can find it elsewhere too. The Detroit News has had stories. But Mark Nida writes, former Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan is out of the governor's race, and we all know why. It's not because he couldn't garner the support of Michigan's business elite as an independent. In fact, those are some of his biggest backers, as these stories in the Detroit News point out. It's not because he's afraid of Jocelyn Benson or the Republican field or John James. He's out, Mark Nida says, because he oversaw the mass poisoning of Detroit and because the Michigan Enjoyer was here to tell the story. For nearly a year, Charlie Leduff at the Michigan Enjoyer cataloging the Flint level scandal now facing Detroit. Demolition holes all around the city filled with toxic dirt under Duggan's watch. He says the Enjoyer showed how neighborhood lots where children play were filled with broken up highways, demolished wings of the Northland Mall, whatever else contractors could find. Testing of the dirt at these lots is ongoing, but a large portion to date has been found unfit for human touch. And it all happened under Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. The media ignored Leduff's reporting on this environmental disaster until he revealed that Brian McKinney, CEO of a now defunct demo outfit, and Mayor Mary Sheffield had an affair while she was voting to award his firm contracts from her seat on the city council. With Duggan out, the establishment Democrats will surely reward him with some high post running University of Michigan, pulling purse strings elsewhere. But, Mark Nida writes at the Michigan Enjoyer, because of Duggan's willful disregard for the health of Detroiters, the city might be facing an environmental cleanup costing $100 million. His true legacy might be bankruptcy number 2. And I read this from Mark Nida in the reporting from the Michigan Enjoyer, and that all makes a little more sense. I don't think a political pro like Mike Duggan was afraid of Jocelyn Benson, or perhaps was unclear that the economy was going to be a big issue in this election. But Detroit's poisoning and toxic material filling holes in Detroit, that might convince someone to drop out. More of Daybreak next.
You want to lose 20 to 50 pounds?
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for both of them this morning. It's going back to 1965 as we dig back in the world of music. Birthdays, death days, anniversaries, number ones. In fact, a number one on this day in 1965. The Beatles, a band you might have heard of, with Ticket to Ride, hit number one on this day back in 1965. Paul McCartney making an appearance last week on the final SNL of the season. Also stayed in New York, did Stephen Colbert's show last night, the last late show. I'm surprised that Steve Dulan is with us this morning, as I know he was up very late last night. Couldn't miss the last late show with Stephen Colbert. So thanks for working on like zero sleep, Steve, this morning and joining
Yeah, I
us
was
here on
sobbing
Daybreak.
till about 5 a.m. Mourning Colbert's loss.
It's completely understandable after watching that monologue 3, 4, 6, 7 times that you'd be emotionally distraught. Again, thanks for pulling it together for us this morning, Steve. Professor, attorney, frequent Steve Gruber Show guest. Steve, I was born and raised in Illinois, as most of our listeners know. I've been here in Michigan for now 10 and a half years. And Illinois is special in so many ways. In one way, they have this FOID card, firearms owner identification card. I had a FOID card when I was in Illinois. It expired a couple of years ago at this point. And that's not something every state has, of course. Lawsuit filed about Illinois' FOID card requirement. Tell us what's happening here.
Yeah, I actually read the complaint just yesterday. It's not long. It is brilliantly succinct. The FOID card is the perfect target for the first one of these suits. And there will be several through the states coming in a wave now. But the FOID card is required for all firearm owners and must be in the owner's possession. Well, you know this, but we'll tell the audience. Must be in the owner's possession during any time you possess a firearm. In fact, my understanding
or even
is,
if you want to purchase ammunition.
Even ammunition, correct, right, exactly right. If you travel with ammunition, you've got to have this card. And my understanding is that even if you are not a gun owner, but you want to go to the range and shoot somebody else's gun, we have rental ranges in most places around the country, or I can lend you a gun to try. You can try one of my guns at the range. Apparently in Illinois, you have to have one of these cards just to do that. It is the most broad and therefore the biggest target for one of these lawsuits based on the Bruin case from U.S. Supreme Court from a few years ago. I don't think it's going to stand. I think the suit's going to be successful. It's kind of easy pickings because Bruin was very clear. The court in Bruin was very clear in saying that the burden is on the government to show that their regulation is something that existed at the time of the founding, or at least a close cousin. That's kind of the phrase we've adopted in my business. It's got to be very, very close to something that existed at the time of the founding. And I don't think anybody's going to be able to find anywhere in the historical record where the colonists who became the first Americans had to walk around with a card in their non-existent wallets in order to carry firearms.
Is Illinois the only state? I thought at one point it was, but then I maybe remember seeing that it wasn't. Other states have something similar to that FOID card.
They don't have something as broad. I mean, there are requirements that are pretty egregious in other states, but Illinois has the broadest of all of them. And that kind of makes sense because back in the 1960s, the first mayor, Daley of Chicago, was the primary exponent of gun control around the country.
And as I'm sure you might have known, maybe 2 years ago, and continued for a while, there was an enormous backlog of FOID applications with the Illinois State Police. And the government of Illinois essentially refused to fund the police with the needed money to hire people to work through these FOID applications. So you had people who wanted FOID cards, which you need to, as you said, shoot, buy ammunition, any of those things, were waiting 18 months to go through FOID applications. So ridiculous on many, many levels. Steve Dulan with us here for another couple of minutes. I think this was released since the last time you were on the show. Did you see this? I think it was an Associated Press story about how people need to go after muskets now, and ban muskets. All these Second Amendment cases, we always hear people say, they didn't mean these type of guns. They meant muskets. They meant you can have a musket and fire a musket if you want. And now the Associated Press with an advocacy piece saying, you know what? We should ban muskets too. They're dangerous.
Sure. Well, you know what? Muskets are dangerous, and any early muzzle loading weapon is dangerous. That's why they caught on. That's why they were so successful. They're very useful for hunting and self-defense. They just have a slower rate of fire, but of course, in the right hands, they're extremely effective. In fact, some of them had kind of a higher rate of fire than we've been led to believe. The founders were certainly aware, by the way, of muzzle loading firearms that had a fairly high rate of fire. They had multiple barreled guns back then. And the idea that semi-automatics are particularly dangerous because they shoot so much faster in terms of rate of fire than a single shot muzzle loader that has to be loaded individually for each shot is really, there's a blurry line there, So sure, the founders were aware of it. That argument won't survive this Bruin standard that any regulation the government puts forth has to be equivalent to something that existed at the time of the founding. They really just hate any of us having the ability to defend ourselves, and they'll think of any way they can to attack it. They just don't sleep on that issue.
Steve Dulan helping us reach our daily quota of Steves on this particular program. We appreciate the time. Have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Thanks. You too, Scott.
Scott Bertram sitting in this morning on Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in this morning. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. You can also find the show out there, stevegruber.com or at Steve Gruber Show on X and your social media apps. This portion of the show brought to you by Ghost Bed. You think a mattress is just furniture? Well, Ghost Bed doesn't think that. They don't build mattresses like furniture. They build them like engineered sleep systems. Serious health equipment designed for relief and recovery, not looks, not fluff. Your body should be healing while you sleep, not fighting for comfort. If you're waking up stiff, if you're tossing and turning, sleeping hot, even reaching for a pain reliever before bed, hoping tonight's going to be different, that's not aging. That could be your mattress talking back to you. And you'll get 101 nights to try your Ghost Bed if you purchase one now. If you don't feel the difference, then you can take it back, risk-free. Ghost Bed's currently running their Memorial Day sale, plus an extra 10% off for the Steve Gruber Show audience. Go to ghostbed.com/Gruber. Use the promo code Gruber. That's ghostbed.com/Gruber and use the promo code Gruber to save and try the Ghost Bed for 101 nights at home before you have to make a decision. Ghostbed.com/Gruber. Gruber. Coming up just after the break, Robert Verbruggen with us, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. His cover piece at the new National Review print edition is Why the Fight Against Fraud Must Be Won. We'll discuss that with him coming up in just a couple of minutes. And you can find me again at Scott Bertram on X or scottbertram.com. A quick plug for this week's Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, which I host, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. Weekly on Fridays is the podcast, and you can also find the show on many fine radio stations across the country. Heather McDonald, also from the Manhattan Institute, is on this week's show, along with Richard Samuelson from Hillsdale in D.C. I talk with him about Common Sense, the pamphlet, very important one, as we walk up to America 250. Find that out today, wherever you find your podcasts. Robert Verbruggen next here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in, back into the world of music. 1971, the Rolling Stones hit #1 on the album charts with Sticky Fingers. Pretty darn good album. Had an actual zipper on the cover designed by Andy Warhol. Sticky Fingers, Brown Sugar, one of the hits. And this one of my all-time favorite Rolling Stones songs, Can't You Hear Me Knockin'? Great interplay between Keith Richards and the marvelous Mick Taylor on guitar. Rolling Stones, #1 of this day back in 1971 with their album Sticky Fingers. Scott Bertram sitting in. Joined now by Robert Verbruggen, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. We had Jesse Arm on yesterday. Robert Verbruggen on today. Robert writing the cover story in the brand new print edition of National Review. You can purchase it if you don't get it delivered or find it online too at nationalreview.com. Why the fight against fraud must be won. Robert, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I had mentioned earlier this morning, Robert, for a number of years now, you'll hear politicians say, I'm going to attack the deficit. I'm going to get our budget in order by going after waste, fraud, and abuse. And for the most part, you hear mainstream media members, Democrats saying that's impossible. There's not any waste, fraud, and abuse, and certainly nowhere near enough to make up the deficits. Now, considering the federal deficit is multiple trillions, that still might be true. But I think what's clear to many of us now is that that fraud is far bigger than perhaps anyone might have imagined.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we are spending so much money that we're not going to solve the entire deficit problem by going after fraud, but there's a lot of fraud being bilked out of taxpayers, and in amounts that are just really kind of staggering. I mentioned in my piece there was a GAO report out of the federal government, and if you just basically take the middle of their range of estimates and multiply it out, divide it out across the population, we're losing about $1,000 of fraud per year for every person in the country. I mean, that's a lot of money that's just being stolen from people, and that we should be trying to get back, even if that's not going to completely solve our deficit.
Something else that seems a little more evident after the viral video in Minnesota by Nick Shirley, after the reporting by Luke Rosiak about what's happening in Ohio, is that it perhaps shouldn't be that hard to identify some of this fraud, because what is being shown, at least in those two states, is fairly blatant and obvious. So why hasn't the government or oversight been more robust about this kind of fraud all across the country?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that it's a legitimately difficult problem to tackle because you have so many different programs giving out so much money in so many different ways. And over time, we just haven't done a great job updating all the policies and all of the technologies that we use to stop it. But a lot of it is also that we're not trying very hard. As you mentioned, sometimes there's things that are going on that are fairly obvious and that could have been caught. One of my favorite examples that I mentioned in the piece was it was an unemployment fraud case in California, where somebody used the name Poopy Britches on their application. These are sometimes you see very elaborate schemes to get money in ways that involve fraudulent documents and all things like that. Sometimes it's just somebody sends in an application that's fraudulent and they get the money anyway. So I think, a big part of tackling this problem is requiring a lot more documentation up front, making sure that people are eligible for the programs before you give them money, rather than doing what some people call pay and chase, which is where you pay the money based on a fraudulent application that you didn't check properly, and then have to chase down the money afterward and try to get it back, which is a lot harder. But there are ways to do that as well, and ways to improve it. So there's a lot of things I talk about in the piece, different ways of improving this, making it better.
Robert Verbruggen with us, the piece, Why the Fight Against Fraud Must Be Won, nationalreview.com, or in the print edition as well. You point out, too, look, we can reduce fraud, but it won't be easy and it won't be free. Anti-fraud efforts have some real trade-offs. Look, we saw yesterday there's now a task force, there's attorneys general. There are people who are now dedicated to rooting out this fraud. Those people also don't work for free. So there are some trade-offs. What should we consider when we think about this?
I mean, I think the way that economists will often put it is the ideal amount of fraud, or the ideal amount of any bad thing usually is not necessarily zero. We can't necessarily drive this to zero. We need to make the trade-off of how much are we spending on this, how much are we throwing kind of sand in the gears of the programs and making it hard for people who actually are eligible to get on, because when you make a lot of documentation required, it becomes harder to get on the programs. I think those are all trade-offs that we need to be considering and thinking about. But I think when you have kind of the things that are going on now, where people are, especially during the pandemic, there were numerous pandemic programs that were just completely rife with fraud because they weren't checking at all. We've gone way too far in the opposite direction, and I think we need to modernize the systems so that they can check and make sure that people are eligible more efficiently. and we need to be using new tools to figure out who's defrauding the programs as it's happening. So there's a recent announcement of the Trump administration that they're rolling out some new AI technologies and developing it for Medicaid fraud to try to detect which claims are not legitimate. I think those are all great ideas, and I think we need to do a lot on here, even if we can't drive it to zero.
Up until now, Robert, it appears to have been fairly easy to bilk some of these systems out of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. So a little projection here. But what is the value of simply some high profile arrests, indictments, as we saw yesterday? The Feeding Our Future CEO was just sentenced to 400 months in prison. What's the value of simple deterrence for some of these enforcement efforts?
Yeah, people respond to incentives. If it gets out, if people are writing rap songs about how easy it is to get pandemic money for free and putting it on YouTube, then people are going to see, well, that's a good idea. That's a good way to defraud the government. If what they're seeing instead is arrests for people who are doing this and got caught doing it because they thought it was easy and it turned out not to be. That sends the opposite message. I think that's going to be a great message, a great way to deter people is to make these high profile arrests and splash some of the news headlines with it. I think people respond to that. I think they respond to things that are high profile, and they also just respond to the incentives that are in front of them and what they see happening to people who do the things that they're tempted to do.
Robert Verbruggen from the Manhattan Institute with us here on Daybreak. Scott Bertrand filling in for Steve and Ivy. Late in this piece at National Review, you say some states, other states, don't seem to want to identify certain types of fraud. Why would states be disincentivized to identify fraud?
Well, a lot of these programs are funded in this kind of weird way. They're not quite federal programs, and they're also not state programs. The federal government is putting up a lot of the money, and the federal government does have certain guidelines and rules that the states have to follow. But the states are the ones on the ground actually implementing it, and they often have a lot of leeway to decide a lot of the rules and things like that. So basically, if a state is getting a bunch of money from the federal government, its biggest incentive is to increase the amount of money it's getting from the federal government, rather than to steward that money in a way that's respectful of taxpayers, frankly. So you have a lot of states that are just not doing a good job beyond what the federal government absolutely forces them to do, to require documentation, to check things against other databases and make sure that people are eligible. And my colleague Chris Rufo had a City Journal piece about fraud in California that talked a bit about it was the home health aid program through Medicaid that was just doesn't require a lot of documentation. You have people who are oftentimes looking after their own family members and basically attesting to their own hours. So it just becomes there's this sort of joint. I think conservatives are often tempted by this sort of joint program because you're kind of leveraging, the best thing about the federal government, which is that it has,
Right
a lot
against
of
the clock
taxing
here,
ability.
Robert. I apologize. Find his piece over at
Okay.
National Review. Thanks, Robert. It's the Daybreak Show with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for both of them this morning. They're back Tuesday after the Memorial Day weekend. Back in time to 1976. Well, Paul McCartney and Wings topped the singles charts with this one. It's a really beautiful song. Fun song. Silly love songs. McCartney was in New York again last night, actually yesterday, for the taping of the final Late Show with Stephen Colbert. He was also on the last SNL last Saturday as well of the season. A truly terrible season of Saturday Night Live, by the way. My other hat, I host a show called Wasn't That Special? 50 Years of SNL, where my co-host and I have watched every episode of SNL ever, which is now more than 1,000 episodes. I've seen every episode. I've seen every sketch. We talk about it. We grade them. We know what's good. We know what's bad. This season of SNL, certainly one of the 10 worst of all time. I don't know exactly where I'd place it yet, but it's somewhere in the 10 worst seasons of SNL ever. And actually, that last one, or the Matt Damon episode, was had a couple of nice sketches, but a lot of bad stuff throughout the season. Anyway, Paul McCartney, Wings, Silly Love Songs, number one on this day in 1976. Very quickly, going back to Robert Verbruggen, we had this announcement yesterday on fraud in Minnesota. 15 indictments covering $90 million in fraud. We, of course, have the person running the Feeding Our Future campaign in Minnesota, $250 million in fraud. She was sentenced to 500 months in prison. Just two of the indictments yesterday for autism therapy treatment, 46 million between those two. There's video of one of the suspects jumping off a balcony to avoid arrest yesterday. These are some of the people bilking you and me and taxpayers of millions of dollars just in Minnesota. And as I said, with Luke Rosiak's reporting, millions of dollars just in Ohio. You extrapolate that across the country, and all of a sudden, as Robert Verbruggen writes, the fight against fraud must be won. The fight against high prices, the fight against inflation also continues. At the White House yesterday, President Trump, along with leaders of some of the big supermarket chains across the U.S., and Lee Zeldin, announcing a rollback on some environmental restrictions on refrigerants, which the supermarket heads say will help lower prices when you're shopping for groceries. I think we all can be in favor of that. A few things yesterday. This first is Lee Zeldin, EPA chief, on this rollback. Cut three here. Lee Zeldin yesterday.
You know, many Americans were expressing a lot of frustration and anger of this rushed, frantic, reckless sprint by the Biden administration to phase out reliable equipment for grocery stores, for restaurants, and for homes. And the consequences, well, they've been devastating. And once again, the Trump administration is answering the call, which will lower the cost of living for hardworking American families. Now look at this chart to your far right. Today's actions are saving over $2.4 billion for American families. It's safeguarding 350,000 jobs. Just in supermarkets alone, we're going to see a savings of $800 million, which Americans will be able to see when they go and buy their food.
Will they see that when they go buy their food? That was a question to Kroger's CEO yesterday at this press conference. Cut two.
For the Kroger company, and we operate about 2,700 supermarkets. An orderly transition of equipment reduces both capital costs and operating costs. And at the end of the day, that's good for consumers because we're able to take that and put that into lowering prices, which is the key objective that we have in our business. So thank you very much.
There you go. So if you shop Kroger, apparently, you will see a difference after these rollbacks. Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, who was a guest just yesterday here on this program, White House correspondent for the Daily Signal, getting a chance to ask a question yesterday of President Trump. How much do you expect this will save the average American family every week on groceries? Do you expect this change to help Republicans in the midterms? This is President Trump's answer to the question from Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell. Cut one.
Okay, very, very substantial. They're going to be a big saving. We're breaking it down. In fact, numbers are coming out this afternoon sometime, but the average family will save a lot of money, and you can have stores. Nobody actually thought of it until it was mentioned this morning. You will have stores closing down in areas where they're not going to have a store anymore. That's right. And you really are being forced to spend money, much more money, on much more expensive equipment that really doesn't work. This friend of mine is a very savvy guy, and big league stuff, and he put some in because he wanted to see, and he said the stuff doesn't work. It doesn't cool the food properly. That's why they call the thing that we're talking about a refrigerant for a reason. It's a refrigerant.
President Trump yesterday responding to Elizabeth Trump and Mitchell. We expect to see some changes. Now, this is a refrigerant, so perhaps it's not going to affect the shelf-stable stuff, bread, apple juice. But if you can reduce costs across the board for big companies like Kroger and others, those savings might trickle across other areas and certainly among some of the refrigerated or frozen food found at the grocery store. This fight against inflation is tough because prices rose significantly under President Biden. We all saw it happen, felt it happen, and now for many out there, I understand it's not enough that inflation is slowing to 1%, 2%, 3% lower than it was before. You want to see prices actually decline, right? After a couple of years of growth. And that's far more difficult to accomplish. And that's why people are feeling frustrated. So a move like this yesterday that actually could reduce costs for Kroger and others and reduce then what's being passed along to consumers and the price of goods on the shelves, that could have a real difference. That could make a real difference on a weekly basis for customers. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in this morning on this Friday. We'll back to wrap up Hour 3 in just a moment. Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. They're back Tuesday. Scott Bertram filling in this morning. Join me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Happy to be with you this morning. Pleased and privileged to fill in when Steve is unavailable. Nearly a decade now of fill-ins, and I appreciate you welcoming me when Steve's unavailable. This portion brought to you by Home Title Lock. Did you know American homeowners nationwide have more than $32 trillion in equity? Cyber criminals are targeting it with a growing scam the FBI calls house stealing. House alarms and doorbell cameras and deadbolts, they won't work against these thieves because they're not after your stuff, they're after your equity. If your title's not being monitored, scammers can transfer the title of your home into their name using a one-page document they file at the county, then take out loans against it or even sell it behind your back. You won't find out until collection or foreclosure notes start arriving in your mailbox. By then, though, the damage has been done. The best way to protect your equity is with triple lock protection from our friends at Home Title Lock. Triple lock protection is 24/7 monitoring, alerts of any changes, and if the worst happens, restoration services at no out-of-pocket cost to you. You can check on your home's title today. Make sure you're not already a victim. Use the promo code Gruber at HomeTitleLock.com. Make sure the title's still in your name. You'll get a free title history report and a free 14-day trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts about any changes, and if fraud should happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to help fix it. HomeTitleLock.com now. Promo code Gruber. That's HomeTitleLock.com. Promo code Gruber for Home Title Lock. Thanks to our guests on today's Daybreak. Amy King, way back in hour one. Wayne Morrow as well. Solomon Schmidt writing the new bio on the life of J.K. Rowling. Also, Dr. Matt Mehan, his new book, The American Book of Fables. And this hour, Steve Dulan and Robert Verbruggen. If you missed anything, check out the podcasts where you find your audio. Check out the videos over at Rumble and elsewhere. And again, have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday here on Daybreak. I'm Scott Bertram, and I appreciate you tuning in and listening this morning. Have a fantastic weekend.